Mayong adlaw!
Sarap.
Xin chào mọi người.
Selamat sore.
You're listening to the Daily DAYscourse brought to you by Dear Asian Youth Iloilo City,
Where we talk about relevant social topics through the perspective of the Ilonggo youth. But today, we have special guests.
Today, we have our other friends from Southeast Asia, or what we'd like to call ourselves, the Shopee Alliance.
Hey everyone, I'm Shyna from Dear Asian Youth Singapore.
Hi guys, this is Isabel from Dear Asian Youth Singapore.
Francesca from Dear Asian Youth Iloilo City.
Ako si Lorraine from Dear Asian Youth Iloilo City.
Namaku Amara from Dear Asian Youth Jakarta.
Namaku Hasna from Dear Asian Youth Jakarta.
Lising from Dear Asian Youth Kuala Lumpur.
Saya Gitanjali from Dear Asian Youth Kuala Lumpur.
Linh from Dear Asian Youth Saigon.
Mình Katie từ Dear Asian Youth Saigon.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Daily DAYscourse, the lack of Southeast Asian representation, a conversation.
As Southeast Asians ourselves, we have noticed that there's a big gap to fill when it comes to Southeast Asians in the media. Although there are some portrayals, they are often inaccurate and overlook the true essence of Southeast Asia as a region. All right, let's get the ball rolling. For the first question, we have Cheska.
What are some existing inaccurate representations of Southeast Asians in the media? Well, for me, I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed is from the movie Crazy Rich Asians. It's more on East Asian representation, and I'm not saying that it's wrong. There's no problem with that. It's just that it depicts Southeast Asians as people who have less opportunities. There was 1% of Southeast Asian actors, and that was only one. I think Chris Aquino. I don't know if you guys know her. Yeah, and then also Asians in Hollywood, they're depicted as maids or people who work in the parlor. And then one more that I've seen is Rush Hour 2. I don't know if you guys watch Rush Hour 2, but then there's this woman called the Dragon Lady who is depicted as someone seductive or someone who's strong and powerful. But then the Southeast Asian characters there are people who work in parlors, the ones who clean the nails of other people. So I think it's quite unfair on our part. What about you, Katie?
Honestly, I agree with you on the Crazy Rich Asians part. It's literally the most popular film in Hollywood that actually depicts Southeast Asians, but it's so immensely off that most Southeast Asians don't live in lavishness and luxury, and a lot of Southeast Asian countries are actually in need of economic aid and stuff. And the film also plays into some Asian stereotypes, the mocking of accents, and I appreciate the strive for diversity, but it still plays into the societal norms of respectability for Asians, that you have to be rich and successful in order to have respect for to gain respect for yourself. What do others think?
In the movie Raya and the Last Dragon, Disney's latest production as part of their infamous Disney Princesses franchise, there is an obvious lack of representation through the story that was said to be inspired by Southeast Asia. The lack of Southeast Asian cast and the approach to combining influences into one story from multiple Southeast Asian countries. It was dubbed a bit of an Asian problem due to the thick East Asian influence on the supposed Southeast Asian background, further proving that the world's perspective of Asia surrounds their perspective of only East Asia. What do you think, Linh?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and it's definitely they say that they try to represent Southeast Asians as a whole, but especially with having only 2 or 3 voice actors actually being Southeast Asian, I feel like that also that overrides the point of it being based in Southeast Asia, you know? And additionally, it's something I think we really need to point out is the generalization of Asians in general in media. So the fact that they can't even separate us from East Asia, that we're all the same, but that's definitely not true. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, actually, a recent misrepresentation I found was from a K-drama called Racket Boys. If you guys watch it, it's on Netflix. The inaccurate Southeast Asian representation actually occurred in the story when one of the main characters had a match with Indonesia with an Indonesian athlete. And in the story, the main character won, and the Indonesian supporters like booed and shouted at the Korean athlete after she stepped out of the court. And you know, they also in the story they also received like bad hotel and food services from Indonesia. And I think that it's incredibly disappointing since Indonesian supporters have been very supportive of winning champions, as you guys can see in the latest Olympics. And we've always made sure to give the best service to international athletes when it comes to competitions and stuff. And this short scene is bound to make people generalize Indonesians and make it seem like they're rude and mannerless. So as an Indonesian watching it, it's definitely upsetting for me. But what reasons do you guys think are behind the lack of Southeast Asian representation in Western media?
For me, I think it really sprouted from how white Western media used to be. Like I'm sure there was a period of time where only white people were allowed to be portrayed in the big screen or even the small screen, especially when it comes to the Western side of the world. And as a result of years and years of people of color not being able to be shown on media or on Western media, big names in the film industry or the media industry are predominantly white, right? As you can see, it's like super white. White directors and writers don't always know how to depict or how they're supposed to portray a person of color on screen. So as a result, they usually write characters. They don't write well-written characters, especially if they're POCs, that they're one-dimensional and any person of any race can fill into that character. Or they just insert a bunch of or like purposely or accidentally, we don't really know, of harmful racial stereotypes into the characters that they write. So that's why the only good representation you actually get in media, a good Southeast Asian representation, is if Southeast Asians direct or write the actual films themselves. That's why there's so limited actually accurate representations of Southeast Asians in media or in general, because you don't see a lot of, I mean, there are Southeast Asian people in the film industry or in the media industry, but they don't get their name out there because they're so overshadowed by white people or white people in general, so that they don't have the chance to actually depict what Southeast Asia is as a region or what its people are actually like. You guys think? Well, Shyna, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that Western media, they probably focus a lot more on maybe playing into certain stereotypes, as mentioned earlier. So like, for example, Southeast Asian people, some of them might play into stereotype that like, they're helpers or they're stuck in poverty, which isn't really very true. And I think that also there's many stereotypes that, for example, Chinese people are like math nerds and like, they're like geniuses, but like you don't really hear of more like people who are also of that same caliber in Southeast Asia. So I think that when you try and portray that in Western media, they also would generally like feed into a lack of Southeast Asian representation because of this sense of unawareness. Yeah, so I really think that yeah, it's because they don't really know much about Southeast Asian. And so like when they think of Asia as a whole, they generally only focus on the more stereotypical aspects of it. Yeah. What did the rest think?
Honestly, I do believe that the problem stems very much in part due to Orientalism and how the Western world views Asia as a whole. Like many Western people, especially with a colonial bias, tend to just lump sum the entirety of Asia, regardless of Southeast or Southeast Asia, into just a singular group. And then they think like, oh, they see one depiction of an Asian, and then they think like, it's probably true for the rest of them as well. I think that's probably also one of the reasons why there's such little representation nowadays, because directors, when they create films and all that, they have like one Asian character or two, and they go like, oh, that we're representing Asians without properly understanding that this is actually only just like one tiny, tiny little corner of Asian society itself. And they're trying to put that label on all Asians everywhere else. That's what I have to say for this though. Does anyone else have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like when someone thinks of Asia, normally your first thought would be like, oh, China, Japan, Korea, because of their cultures being brought to Western media a lot more, like K-pop, anime, all that stuff. And additionally, due to the Southeast Asians' different sort of culture and occasionally a darker skin tone, sometimes people don't like to lump us together with other Asians. They want to believe that all Asians are more or less the same, with all the stereotypes. Like maybe all of them look like models or all of them have fair skin. But in reality, Asia is a really, really diverse continent. There are a lot of different types of people there. Speaking of which, what impacts does the lack of representation bring?
Yeah, I think I can add on to this. So I think that for the lack of representation, I think it really gives a very wrong perception of what Southeast Asian countries are. So like for example, in Crazy Rich Asians, Singapore is displayed as like a paradise with huge mansions and all the beautiful parts of Singapore, like Marina Bay Sands and like the infinity pool and all the expensive jewelry and designer item shopping. But honestly, like I guess you can say that Singapore is a rich country in the sense that it does have the highest concentration of millionaires in the world. But then is Crazy Rich Asians actually like trying to represent the rich part of Singapore or like Singapore as a whole? Because like, yeah, if they just want to represent the rich people in Singapore, then I mean, well done to them. But I think that if you're trying to market your film in a way that it's trying to showcase like Asian diversity, I think that the basic decency is to show that like Singapore isn't like that on a whole. Like no one is going for designer bag shopping experiences every day, because like Singapore isn't just like a theme park. Like Singapore is actually like rather middle class, I guess, because most people do live in public housing flats. And so I guess that if you're going to sell yourself as a film that like celebrates diversity, then you should also focus on other aspects. And so I think like if you don't have proper representation, people are just gonna forever have a wrong idea of Southeast Asian countries. And yeah, so in a sense, in the context of Crazy Rich Asians, that would mean that people would think Singapore is just all super rich people, which is wrong. And also like in Crazy Rich Asians, they actually casted people who are like Eurasians and Chinese. But I mean, not to say that that's wrong, because there's actually still, I mean, there are people in Singapore that are Chinese and Eurasians, of course, but especially like Singapore being a multiracial society, right? I think that by not including more people of other races, it also doesn't really accurately represent Singapore as a whole. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add
on? For me, I just wanted to add on to what Shyna said, that it constantly puts negative stereotypes, it constantly reinforces them instead of getting rid of these stereotypes, which is really a way better option for everybody. But I don't know if you guys have heard the term jungle Asians. but that's what they actually call Southeast Asians, especially in Western media. There's this like the fancy Asians, which are like the Japanese and the Chinese, or like East Asia as a whole, and then there's the Southeast Asians, which they constantly call the jungle Asians, because they said they're dirty, they bring diseases or something. Honestly, it just puts so much of Southeast Asia in a light that is so dark and so misleading, because Southeast Asia has a lot of good sides to it as well. You know, like we're not just what Western media thinks we are, and there's also a depiction of Southeast Asians being migrant workers only, like helpers or drivers in other countries or factory workers. I mean, that is true for a big chunk of our population. But what it does is that people usually expect, oh, you're from the Philippines, so you must be a helper or something like that. I have heard people with stories like, oh, just because I am a certain race or I'm from this certain part of the world, they immediately think that my parents do this job, or they think that people around me do this type of job only because that's what people show on TV. Like in Crazy Rich Asians, I've read the book, and the only depiction of Filipinos in that book was Filipinos being helpers to the Singaporeans, which is true. I will not deny that being a domestic helper in like Singapore or in other places is like a super noble job, but it's a stereotype that it's not. I'm not saying that it's bad, but it's something that constantly lumps people into a certain group, which with no room for something beyond that. You know, you get me? Okay, what do you guys think about this?
I definitely agree with you. Like all these stereotypes and maybe even like a basic lack of knowledge about Southeast Asians can be really, really hurtful and kind of discriminatory, you know, just because a certain portion of, say, Filipinos come to Singapore to work as helpers doesn't mean that everyone in the Philippines wind up working as helpers. It's not like that. It's not set in stone, you know. Apparently, I read somewhere online a couple of days ago that some people from the Western countries think that Singapore is part of China. I'm not sure why. It could be just a basic lack of geographical knowledge, or maybe it's the fact that majority of Singapore consists of the Chinese, and because majority look Chinese, they immediately lump us as part of China. But the reality is that we are really, really different. And sure, we have a few pieces of like same culture, but that being like China isn't our entire personality. This false info can be really, really harmful. It's quite annoying. Like sometimes when I'm browsing social media, I'll see like a comment on a not so nice post that's possibly racist, and they'll be like, oh, as a citizen of Singapore, I find this pretty harmful, blah 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 blah. And then I've actually seen some replies that are like, oh, but you're from China, not Southeast Asia, you don't have a say in this. And it's like, no. Yeah, that's what I think. Anyone else?
Yeah, so I totally agree with what's been said so far, but I also think in Western media, because Western media is so popularized, like we may not all of us may consume different countries' media, but almost everybody consumes Hollywood movies, Disney movies. Everybody has access to this. It's in every cinema, you know, it's big production movies. And to have that disconnect where we don't see Southeast Asians a lot in these movies, and even when we do, the representation is so shallow and not really what we feel like Southeast Asians are, it doesn't give Southeast Asian adults and children positive role models or representation in media. And that can be detrimental, because if you don't see yourself in media, it's like you're not valid, and there's this lack of validation and this divide. So not only, I think, does it affect how people from other countries or people from other continents see us, I think it also has an impact on Southeast Asians living in Southeast Asia, Southeast Asians living in Western countries, and their experiences there, or Southeast Asians traveling. Whatever it is, that lack of validation and that disconnect, and that there's no role models to see yourself in media, it can also discourage people who want to work in big Western film industries. Like if I'm an aspiring filmmaker or an aspiring actress, and I want to work in Hollywood, I may not want to do that because I haven't seen that representation. I haven't seen people do roles where I feel like we've been properly represented. So I have a fear that, like, obviously there are so many Southeast Asian filmmakers and actresses and actors, but they're not represented by these big Western media outlets. And that's probably because they're not really given the chance to, because they're so outshined by their Western counterparts. And so it would be discouraging for myself as an aspiring person who wants to work in that industry. And I think that's really detrimental. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
For me, I definitely agree with that. There's no model to look up to, and that itself reduces our chances, along with the inaccurate stereotypes that have been thrown around as well. Like again, the fact that all of us are just because that's what Western that possibly what Western people see in media, suddenly all Asians are Chinese, or there's this like linking to what Lorraine said earlier about how we're somehow classified as the jungle Asians. You know, they're saying that we're dog meat eaters, like we eat rats, or we're like hordes of poverty living in hovels of unsanitary conditions. And I feel like that itself is just that's not true. In fact, yes, maybe in some cases, like some people do eat dog meat. Like it's in Vietnam, definitely some people do eat dog meat, but that doesn't mean everyone does it. So you can't just put us into this circumscribe us into this role that that we're suddenly we're all low class individuals, because I think one incident that definitely represents this is one of my teachers who came here to work in Vietnam to teach the international school that I go to. She told me a story personally that that when she had a farewell party with her family, what her family gave her was this card that said, "We hope you go to Vietnam and enjoy this experience to," like it sort of sounded like charity, if you ask me, but when that wasn't true at all, you know. Like in fact, she went to most of the people at the international schools here, at least, are and I'm very lucky to be one of them, but we're very privileged, and yeah, I feel like that overwrites the whole of Southeast Asia in general. And even during the pandemic, we were given these, we were suddenly all Asians again were Chinese, and that all of us were disease carriers, and that was definitely unsettling for a lot of us. And carrying on from this, I'd like to ask what everyone thinks about the misinterpretation of Southeast Asian Western media and how it has negatively affected the image of Southeast Asia.
I think the media affects your mind. It changes perspectives and perceptions. Those who at first have no clue when it comes to a certain topic and it arises in the media, as Linh said, immediately afterwards, whenever said topic comes up, they would always refer back to how the media portrayed it. So they're generalizing it. The same goes for representation in Southeast Asia, how the media portrays it. They're often connected to sexualization and objectification, of which is extremely harmful because it truly narrowed and harmed the true Southeast Asia. They're also portrayed as filthy rich in many media, making people's perceptions think that no one is or can be poor in Southeast Asia. What do you guys think?
Well, as of what I've seen, I'm agreeing with you actually with the media thing. Just like trends, whatever is on the internet is usually being followed by the people. When many people interact, that's when it suddenly becomes believable. Like the more interaction it has, the more believable it will be for other people, since there's a big number of people reading it or watching it. One example that I could give is the Filipino accent. Like how is the misrepresentation of Southeast Asia in Western media like negatively affected us Filipinos? Where there's this thing called Pinoy baiting. I don't know if you guys know what that is. Wherein people like use Filipinos for clout, and as a Filipino citizen, it's not something to be proud of. You know, we have an accent. Others have an accent. Like 50% of the Filipinos have this Filipino accent that people make fun of or use. It's always used for clout, or in other movies especially. We are suddenly known for people with an accent. You know, it's not. We have more to give than just an accent, and we're always being depicted wrongly. And for Southeast Asians, do you know what ABG is? It's called Asian baby girl. It's being fetishized by so many people in America mostly. You know, it's not something to be fetishized. Let girls be what they want to be. It doesn't mean that if they dress this certain way, it's for them. They're suddenly being fetishized and sexualized in other countries just for being themselves. You know, it's not something to be proud of or not something to be happy about. It's something we should change. And it's like the domino effect. Like other people will do it and then more people will do it. That's why I think if we could start a domino effect wherein we're gonna change it. If we can change it, they can change it, and then so on and so forth. What about you, Hasna?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the both of you. But if I were to like specifically focus on Indonesia, Western media rarely ever represent Indonesians. I mean, like I've never found like any like Indonesians in movies. I don't know, maybe I just don't watch enough movies. But when they do like put Indonesians out in international TV, the things they would put out are some things that will make viewers look down upon us Indonesians. I mean, I know that when I would see Indonesia on international TV, it will be on National Geographic, and it will be of like our forest or our traditional people, which is not a bad thing, you know, because like those parts are a part of Indonesia, and I'm glad that those parts are being broadcasted to the public. But if those are the only things that they would put out on international TV, it will make it seem like our country is this like underdeveloped, poor country that people can look down upon. I mean, like I know this because I've had conversations with like international friends where I would say that, yeah, I'm from Indonesia, and they would be shocked at how good my English is, or like they would ask me like, where is that? Like, do you guys have like malls? Do you guys live in like forests or something? So it's definitely degrading in a way where when people would say those type of stuff. So I think that it's definitely something that we should pay more attention to. What do you guys think about it?
If I'm talking specifically in Vietnam, like there's this small portion of a documentary I saw a while ago of like the Vietnam War, and it portrayed like two soldiers just like sitting on the pavement, and then there's a random Vietnamese girl who approaches them and just calls them to go like have sex with them or something, and it it was like in a really degrading accent, and like the dudes on the pavement just like laughed at it. And that film, if I'm not mistaken, is pretty popularized across the Western media. So now there's this stereotype of Vietnamese people, either they're girls on the streets who are so desperate to make money that they're willing to like call on their arch enemy, and or street vendors on the street who are poor and live without a home. So that's like the portrayal of Vietnamese people nowadays with most people, I assume, because like it's Vietnamese people are also really easily mistaken with Chinese people because of when we were, dominated by the Chinese for over 1,000 years. And yeah, they're easily mistaken, but when it comes to Vietnamese people, they don't. They mostly don't be like they're mostly not portrayed as being like fancy and rich, or most people just ask me if I'm Chinese, and when I say if I'm Vietnamese, they're like, isn't that Chinese? So it's pretty sad. And there's also something called the mono minority myth, which is like when people set unbelievably high standards for Asians. I don't know if you know this, but like in most films that are popular in Western media, the nerd or like the extraordinarily homework kid, the kid who always reminds the teacher of the homework, are always Asian and like wears glasses and stuff. And so I think, again, from what Amara said earlier, when people see this type of stuff on the media, consciously or not, it affects how they think and how they view Asians in general. And therefore, it becomes a stereotype that all Asians are smart, all Asians have straight A's, and all Asians should be able to do your homework for you. So that's harmful, especially for like students and international students living in Western countries. What do you think, Lee?
Exactly what you said earlier. And if I'm correct, actually, I think that the film you're talking about is Full Metal Jacket, I think, about the Vietnam War. And well, it's also a source of like a lot of Asian stereotypes that have happened, like especially because of COVID-19. Like, y'all remember during like earlier part of 2019, 2020, and not 2019, 2020, I think, when there's a whole lot of shit going down in the US, and then everyone was going the China flu and Wuhan flu and all these, and then we saw the resurgence of stereotypes and certain catchphrases associated with Asian people that came specifically from that film, such as "We love you," "I love you long time already," and then "You want a Fuki." It's sort of like a degradation of Vietnamese people, especially in a sense how it portrays like Vietnamese men as immature, childish, in need of protection by the bigger US forces. And then there's also the Lotus Beauty stereotype, which has also been perpetuated, which sort of depicts Asian women as the sort of like beautiful, I need to be rescued damsel in distress by the white savior. But like beyond those stereotypes, I think it's also kind of pretty terrible that in a lot of Southeast Asian sort of like representations, it's always depicted as this sort of backward, untamed land of like savage people and their like culture. Like here in Malaysia, one of the terrible stereotypes that are still existing today that still affects how people view Asians, especially from Malaysia and those of Sarawak and Sabah, is sort of like the headhunter stereotype, that there's some people out there who just sort of like view their history, well, as being these sort of warrior fighter tribes who just kept on fighting violently and killing everyone, slicing off their head, pickling them. And it's a very harmful stereotype to perpetuate. It also just sort of downplays all the significance that Southeast Asia has actually played within the history of the world. Like, Southeast Asia was the hub for economic trade and maritime industries all the way through, even until the industrial era and even afterwards. And lack of representation of that just leads to people coming with the understanding with like, oh, Southeast Asia was just that place that got colonized, that got civilization brought to it. Like, place was just like this empty desert landscape before. And then now there's civilization because of the work of white people, when in reality we've had kingdoms and small empires being over here for even earlier than their Western counterparts, actually. But it's just very much inaccurate. And going back to an earlier point, actually, regarding like why exactly Southeast Asians aren't as represented as often as East Asians. Why exactly do East Asians get more representation in the media?
I believe that this is because of the rise of like anime and J-pop, K-dramas, K-pop, right? It's really, really popular in the Western countries. Additionally, there's also the Made in China label. Like, if you were to go to a random store to go and buy, say, a pen, and then if you check the tiny corner, not most of the time you'll say this made in China, made in China, made in China. It's a lot of things are made in China. Additionally, China is a really, really large country. So naturally, a lot of people know about it. I'm talking about the K-pop, right? A lot of K-pop industries are really pretty well known in more Western countries and in Western media. Like there's JYP, YG Entertainment. YG Entertainment looks like a Blackpink, I think. I'm not sure. So I'm not a K-popy. And because those industries and companies are really well known, the moment there's a new group, they can immediately advertise it in the Western countries. So because of that, they can spread a lot of their culture, a lot of their music to other countries. Whereas for Southeast Asian countries, you don't exactly find like big industries similar to the K-pop ones, but for like Southeast Asian songs instead, it's not exactly common. I can't really think of any company that does that. Like a lot of East Asian content in particular finds their way into Western countries. Like anime is super popular, right? And they even have like they have hired voice actors living in America or UK for them to dub over the anime for the viewers who only understand English, or their subtitles created, But if there's, say, a more traditional, like maybe a traditional Singaporean movie or something, even though it's probably already in English, it's not advertised in countries outside of Singapore and maybe some other parts of Southeast Asia. Even that's rare though. And because of that, there seems to be more representation from East Asians than Southeast Asians in particular. Any other opinions?
Yeah, I do think that, like you said, trends and pop culture is very much a big reason why we see the popularization of East Asians and therefore the representation of East Asians in media. I also think it has to do a little bit with history. So a lot of like East Asians migrated to America because of war and because of different complications a long time ago. But there's also this like generalization, like Linh said earlier, people think Vietnamese people are Chinese because they look the same. And I think that, like, for example, in To All the Boys I've Loved Before, they're supposed to be Korean Americans. but the main actress is a Korean American, but if I'm not mistaken, the other two, the sisters, one is Vietnamese American and one is Cambodian American, if I'm not mistaken. And that comes from the fact that there's this Western idea that all Asians look the same, all Asians look typically East Asian, and therefore they don't feel the need to represent other communities, including the Southeast Asian community, in their media. And there's also that whole topic of the fetishization of East Asian women, which again is related to people wanting to portray East Asian women because they're desired and because that's what people want. Does anyone else have any ideas?
Yeah, I totally agree on the industry, like the entertainment industry part, especially the K-pop industry. Like, I mean, the K-pop industry is huge in the Western media because it portrays such a glamorized version of Korean culture and like Japanese culture, which is all like kawaii or anime, like everything is pink and cute or stuff like that. And I also think it has to do with some of the history of these countries. From what I know, in most Western textbooks, major historical events are related to like China, Korea, or Japan, or East Asia in general. And I don't mean to say that other Asian countries didn't really make it in Western textbooks, but it's mostly obscure. And the only reason why the US actually knows of Vietnam is that because we kind of won against them. We kind of won against them during the Vietnam War, I guess. And yeah, like Japan at one point was really big during the World War, and China is a huge like manufacturer of worldwide stuff. Like they import a lot of stuff worldwide, and a lot of appliances that we use is mostly made in China. Japan is also like one of the leading countries in technology and inventing new robots, and yeah, that's from what I know. And China at one point colonized the entire Vietnam for over like 1,000 years until I can't remember. This is Vietnamese history, but yeah, I can't remember. I can't really remember, but yeah, because they're so big historically, and they're still so big now that Western people are so familiar with the name of these countries. What do you think, Hasna?
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like because East Asian countries are more developed in most aspects, I mean, like politically, economically, etc. So they're bound to be more well-known, obviously. And so therefore, when screenwriters were to choose an Asian country for their stories, they would immediately go to a country that their audience, the Western people, know more of. They would cherry pick parts of Asian cultures that they feel would be digestible for the Asian stereotype that they have created. Like, you know, Koreans as K-pop idols, Japanese as like ninjas or assassins, Chinese as like tech savvies, Filipinos as mates, and you know, barely any other Asian country's representation. And even if they would be creating a story based off of Southeast Asian culture, like Raya and the Last Dragon, the cast would mostly be East Asian. So again, it all links back to ignorance. And I think the lack of education is the root problem here, and that's something that we need to fix.
Yeah, I think yeah, as a lot of you guys have mentioned already, East Asian countries' culture are like a lot more common to Westerners, along with like their ideas, for example, pale skin being like a symbol of purity and status. Yeah, and like I guess because of that, Western filmmakers will get that wrong perception of Asia. So because like Southeast Asians on a whole are like generally more darker skin, so some Western filmmakers may then have the perception that, oh, we're not Asian enough compared to East Asians, so they might then choose to cast more East Asians instead of us. So like I think on top of that, there's also, I mean, Southeast Asian countries have a lot of rich diversity, but there's also like a few commonalities between us, I guess, which might make it difficult for like people to differentiate. So like I guess okay, geographically wise, Southeast Asian countries like lie between the tropics, so we have similarities in like climate, and I guess there's because of like these kind of similarities, there are ways for people to like adapt to the very like local similar environments. So, like I think a lot of Southeast Asian countries like we grow rice in agricultural fields, and like I guess Southeast Asian countries also lie between China and India, and we do a lot of trading with them. So I guess like this sort of things are like similarities where like okay, so like when a Westerner comes to Southeast Asian countries, I think it's slightly harder for them to then spot the differences and like really appreciate the diversity that we have, because Southeast Asian is like it's a whole new culture for them. So because of this like lack of awareness, they then can't really sieve out the differences and truly appreciate them. So I guess they would just be like, oh, we'll just lump Southeast Asian cultures together. And actually in like Raya and the Last Dragon, I think during the filmmaking process, the filmmakers intentionally incorporated commonalities across Southeast Asia. So I think they were designing this land, and then they were like, oh, they didn't want to put like this land being Thailand, this land being Vietnam, and this land being Malaysia, because they didn't want to be like, oh, this country is bad, this country is good, and like our hero is from here. So they actually specifically for visual development, they just took things that wove across all the countries in Southeast Asia, and they just like lumped it together. So like, I mean, it might have worked if that's what they wanted to achieve in Raya and the Last Dragon. But if we keep doing this fusion, instead of honoring and recognizing the diversity that each Southeast Asian country has, we would just be like, oh, Southeast Asians are one culture and East Asians have their own culture. Yeah, so how does it make you guys feel when Southeast Asians are portrayed wrongly in the media?
For me, for the most part, it makes me feel disappointed and angry. I don't know, guys. I don't know if you guys know Gossip Girl, the 2021 version, but there's a character named Aki, and he's played by Evan Mock. Evan Mock is part Filipino and part white, but his mom is Filipino and his dad is white, and he grew up in Hawaii and all that stuff. But the character he plays is Japanese, and his mom, the actress who plays his mom, is Korean. The writer of the show, Joshua Safran, he has stated specifically that the character was written for Evan, like the character itself, Aki, was written for Evan himself particularly. So why did he not make the character Filipino? Why is it, if the person who's acting the character out is this specific race, why don't you just stick to that specific race? Because that's what they actually are, you know? Also, in some parts, it makes me feel degraded, because I don't know if you have seen the show 90 Day Fiancé. 90 Day Fiancé is like the one where fiancés or like couples who met online meet up and then they spend 90 days together and see if they're a perfect fit or something. And there are so many Filipinos portrayed in that show, and then it's kind of in a bad light because they're like, oh, this Filipina married or like went with this white dude because she wants to get out of poverty. So from stereotypes like that, it's super degrading and it's super harmful to the Philippines or to Southeast Asians even, because a lot of people actually come to Southeast Asia as sex tourists. Like old white men come to Southeast Asia to look for young wives who are in poverty, who can't survive without a white man or something, to marry and then apparently be their wife in America or in some other Western country out there, which is not the case, because whenever you see a white man and a Filipino woman on TikTok, it's even harmful for Asians ourselves, for Filipinos ourselves, because they're like, oh, another gold medal for a Filipina who has gotten out of poverty. Like when they see a white man and a Filipino man together, something like that. It's super harmful, because although we can't deny that oftentimes that it's not oftentimes, but sometimes it is the case, it diminishes the fact that maybe some people just marry for love. Maybe they do love each other, and it's not just because they're poor and the girl's poor and they need money. So it the misrepresentation or the wrong portrayals of Filipinos or Southeast Asians in general, even Vietnamese people, they painted them as like sex workers or people with no money who would like go with any random white guy just to have sex with them and then get money from them. It's super harmful because in a way, it really degrades what the race is as a whole, because we have so much more to offer than whatever they portray on Western media. We have beaches, we have people who are so sweet and so kind, or we have beautiful cultures that are exclusive to us, or beautiful cultures that are a mix of so many different cultures like Singapore or Malaysia. We are so diverse, but that is never shown on TV because we are so limited to a specific stereotypes that we won't be able to express what we truly are as a region. How about Linh?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. Like, for me personally, it makes you feel undermined because people constantly are planting these stereotypes, and suddenly, like, even if they aren't from your race or from your culture, from your country, like they don't have the same nationality as you, but they plant these stereotypes, and suddenly that becomes a norm. And because of that, your culture, your beliefs, for me at least as a Southeast Asian, it's overridden, it's inaccurate, and I feel like to some extent, like that makes you feel powerless. I think clothing and religion also go into this as well, because I've come across social media posts that have shown, for example, maybe a foreigner, a Western foreigner, they go to Buddhist temples, and a lot of Southeast Asians actually are Buddhist, and they go to these temples and they post pictures of themselves in improper clothing. In Buddhist temples, you're supposed to you're not supposed to have your legs bare. You're supposed to completely cover your lower body. But they had bare legs and they were showing inappropriate gestures or stances next to these Buddhist statues. And that is incredibly undermining the culture that we have here. And it's disrespectful to what we appreciate. And also, certainly for it can be the case for a lot of fashion around Southeast Asia, but for me personally, for Vietnam, the ao dai, it's our tradition. It's what people think of when they think of Vietnam, you know. But because of these stereotypes again, Southeast Vietnamese ao dai is suddenly becoming fetishized or sexualized, and they're made to be provocative, and it cancels out the whole message of what we see women as here in Vietnam. We see them as pure, virtuous, and that is what should be showcased instead, you know. And also, I additionally like to talk about my personal experience being in Europe or in the UK once. I was going there for summer camp once, and I was talking with my friends, and suddenly a group of other guys, they came up to me and they started swearing to me in Chinese, you know. And it was really disrespectful, and I regret not having done anything at the time, but It again goes to show the lack of knowledge that everyone has about Southeast Asia and how much we're wrongly represented in the media or in general. Does anyone else have anything else to add about this?
Yeah, it's really respectful. Like, honestly, a lot of our Asian stereotypes, they weren't even from here. They're just created by Western media who kind of like just saw one thing and just pasted it onto the rest of all of our cultures and kind of like got many things wrong about all of our lifestyles, cultures, religions, everything about it mostly. Especially recently, given the modern trend of sort of like Instagram posting and all of that, there's recently been like a lot of people, mostly Westerners, coming over to like touring whatever popular tourist sites there are, and then sort of like just taking Southeast Asia as less of like countries and places of unique cultures and all that, but more like this land of mysticism and tourism and travel, and sort of like they've turned Southeast Asia into their aesthetic instead of what it actually is, which is our home. Besides that, though, there's also just the fact that most of history has been written by written from perspective of Western views. We all study and look at very much Eurocentric versions of history, and it's sort of just like undermined the entirety of like every single Southeast Asian country. Like I mentioned it a bit earlier, but it's like our this this part of the world's history is sort of underrepresented and more often than not just straight up ignored or erased. We're kind of like a place which has like, oh, we have that special culture, but we didn't actually contribute anything to the world, which is very much wrong. We've been here for a long time ago. We built many things. We got many great cultures, civilizations. Like, honestly, it's just kind of depressing whenever it's just like someone comes up to you and they just like suddenly reveal all their ignorance about Southeast Asia and immediately just assume who you are and like that they know everything about you just because they just sort of seen a couple of clips from YouTube or anything like that. It's kind of just left me feeling kind of empty, hollow, numb-ish towards like these sort of encounters. Like honestly, it's got to a point where it's kind of like expected that people kind of assume that you're not Southeast Asian, you're immediately from this part of East Asia instead of whatever place this is. And that's just how I kind of feel about how people treat Southeast Asia. What do you think? Oh no. Jessica?
In my opinion, as of what I've seen, like here in the Philippines as a Filipino, I know education is not supposed to be considered a privilege, but here somehow it is. Tuition fees are getting higher and scholarships are barely given. That's why we rely on the media. Like almost everyone has a phone. Philippines is known as the texting capital of the world. So almost everyone has a phone. Whatever is depicted on the media will be reflected on the people. So this is where the domino effect comes in. We're already depicted as maids in a derogative way. We're also depicted as people with accents, and now we are clickbait. So it's called Pinoy baiting. I explained this earlier. Now it's not something to be proud of. If people in the Philippines rely on the media, maybe in your countries too, they may also rely on the media. That's why we should change this. I've been trying to advocate change for a while, and I've been talking about this. We need to change the posts because the more people interact with false representation, the more people will follow. That's why it's not something that we should just leave alone. This is something we should be angry about. We should be disappointed. That's why for me, right now, I am really disappointed and I feel degraded. This is this is getting out of hand. We are already being fetishized, being depicted as people who are not. We have more to give. You know, as Southeast Asians, we have more to give. We're not who they say we are. That's why we are still at our youth. We are young adults. We need to start this change because if no one's gonna do it, then here we are. We're already talking about it. This is a start. What do you think, Amara?
Thank you, Jessica. I think it makes me feel sad and it makes me feel angry. It is just unjust and very harmful, and it shouldn't be that way. We deserve fair treatment to be known as who we truly are. The wrongful portrayals branch out to many more issues, as everyone has mentioned, that can affect us even greatly, i.e., mistreatment, stereotyping, etc. And it is crucial to change that perception of the world, especially when it comes to the youth audience. When kids watch a movie on the screen and wonder to themselves, where am I? Why does none of the characters look like me? And when they do look like this Southeast Asian girl or boy, they would draw conclusions and generalizations from the media to their environment, having questions about the blatant difference and coming to believe that the media is what it's supposed to be like in the environment. I used to think that us Asians are supposed to be smart for whatever reason, no matter what, because of the media. You don't necessarily have to be academically intelligent. Asians, especially Southeast Asian, can be artistically intelligent too. We are as diverse as any ethnicity, and I hope that we can bring light to this better in the future. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for all those insightful sharings. I think personally that is a lot that actually needs to be done for Southeast Asians to truly be represented in Western media and in general. So with that, we've come to the end of the first episode of our conversation brought to you by the Shopee Alliance. This has been Shyna,
Isabel,
Hasna,
Lorraine?
Amara,
Hasna.
Leasing.
Gitanjali.
Linh.
And Katie.
Okay, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Daily DAYscourse. Make sure to be on the lookout for our next episode, which will be continuing today's conversation on the lack of Southeast Asian representation. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, we're done.